So this is Louis, and for today I want to talk about a phenomena that I see growing among the established right. So there is the online right, or the new right. I want to call it the alternative right, but then there's the connotation of being the alt-right. But someone like Will Chamberlain, Jack Posobiec, so on and so forth, they are the new right, they are the online right, they're not part of the establishment. If you have a show on Fox News, if you work for a think tank or for some like major league NGO, then you're establishment. But, you getting a retweet, I don't think that really makes you establishment. That being said, it seems as though that there is a growing demand, there's growing pressure for the Republican Party, for the conservative movement, for the right to focus on domestic unrest. That's the word I'm looking for, because it's growing in the United States. Discontentment is growing, unrest is growing, disillusionment is growing. I agree that the right should focus on domestic politics and should provide an alternative, when compared to the left, for the issues at hand as it relates to economic mobility and other such issues based around economics, but really, if we're being honest, class. In my view, that is the problem. That is the actual lens, so to say, by which that we have to view the topic. Because when we're talking about mobility, we're talking about class mobility. The ability for one to work hard and move from one class to another. And I'm going to point to this article here, which is from a mainstream conservative outlet. The author is Julius Crein, and it's called The Real Class War. And what his argument is in this article is that while there is discontent among the lower classes, there's also an endless treadmill and rat race among the upper classes as well. And that one of the things that we see in terms of a phenomena is upper middle class people and wealthier people growing more in favor of socialism and hard left politics, and the problem that that presents to a functional society. His argument in this is to bring up the issue that discontent is growing overall. It isn't just the lower classes. It's for those that are more posh, that are in fact wealthier, the professional classes, those that are from families that are in fact wealthier, that go to the Ivy League colleges and so on, that even with them, there's discontent growing. There's the issue of, like, for example, he talks about the scandal that happened where rich people were bribing coaches and people within colleges to get their kids into college. The Ivy League colleges, the important colleges, they were bribing people to get them in. And the question is, why would they do that? And the answer isn't, because they're evil and so on. It's because it's a rat race. It's a competition. In order for their kids to compete, they need to get into these prestigious colleges, to get these degrees, to network, and so on, so that they can be equally prestigious, if not more, than those that they're competing against for these professional jobs, these white-collar jobs, these high-level, high IQ jobs, well-educated jobs, that you need a high-end degree for. While I have to say that my level of concern for these kind of people is exceptionally low, I'm fine with him caring, and I'm not saying that this concern is not legitimate, but I am saying that personally, I don't care. That even though this is a problem, and it speaks to one of the issues we have in terms of education being awful and more about prestige and nonsense than it is anything real, anything that's really necessary, I find my sympathies lying with those that are closer to the bottom than those closer to the top. But still a legitimate issue, still a legitimate article, and if you want to, go read it. But his point here, and I'll go to the end of the article and I'll read you that, just so you have an idea. And again, this is not some radical. This is not some fringe guy. This is someone who is more establishment right. Ultimately, the question that will determine the future of American politics is whether the rest of the elite will consent to their continued proletarianization only to further enrich this pathetic oligarchy. If they do, future historians of American collapse will find something truly exceptional. Capitalism without competence and feudalism without nobility. Again, this is a conservative that's saying this. This is not some far leftist. This is not someone working for Glenn Greenwald's outlet. All right? This is someone on the right that is openly condemning the way things are, the way things are currently, the status quo, as just oligarchy. And he also uses the phrase feudalism without nobility. Again, this is a conservative. This should tell you the discontent that's growing. Not just overall, but specifically on the right, the established right. They are not happy with the mercenary right running the show. They're not happy because the outcomes that we're seeing from the leadership of the mercenary right are not satisfactory. Too many people are left to rot. Too many people are being taken advantage of and are just seen as units on a spreadsheet. And I'll say, just as an example, that's the reason why I use John Stossel in the thumbnail as an example of the mercenary right. John Stossel is not a liar. John Stossel is not dishonest from what I've seen of him. But he is a fucking ideologue. He is delusional. And nothing on earth short of a fucking... put a gun to the back of his head and say, are you willing to, pass a worker safety bill, something like that? He'll say no, because he is deranged. Again, that doesn't mean he's not principled. It doesn't mean he's dishonest or any negative characteristic like that. Such as you could say about David French as being totally two-faced and inconsistent, or even someone like Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro and the rest are two-faced and dishonest, and they change their positions, on a whim. David French is terrible, as an example, and people wished I would use that instead, and I agree. David French is terrible. But John Stossel's on the same fucking side. He is. As much as he can give you a good lecture on individual liberty, so on, property rights, so on, the good and moral elements of capitalism, to which I agree. It's a lecture, and he is an ideologue. He is utopian. He is part of the mercenary right, and he is not a philosophical conservative. He is a libertarian. He is an ANCAP. He is a philosophical liberal, a deranged one, a radical one. He's not a fucking conservative. As much as I want to say that he can give some good lectures from his pulpit, and that I agree with and I can't argue, I can't refute, he's still an ideologue. When push comes to shove, 100 out of 100 times, this guy is going to stump for the vulture capitalists, and he's going to say to the working class man, fuck you, just try harder, bitch. Get over it. Try harder. He might be more honest than Charles Koch and Paul Singer, but that doesn't mean that his ideology is in any way different to theirs, because as far as I can tell, it isn't. And so we're going to listen to this segment, a Tucker Carlson show, featuring him and a guy named Ned Ryan. Ned Ryan works for some NGO, some conservative NGO. He is himself a conservative, self-professed. He is in the Beltway. He is, working for some organization, very likely based out of Washington, D.C., that lectures conservatives on all sorts of things. He is establishment, as far as I can tell, from what I know. He's just another establishment conservative in the Beltway that lectures everyone on what conservatism is. I want you to listen to this segment and understand the radical aspect to this conversation between two self-described conservatives. How radical this sounds.
Ned Ryan is founder and CEO of American Majority, and he joins us tonight. Ned, thanks so much for coming on. I have to ask you, since you are part of the kind of professional conservative firmament and have been for a long time, you know the landscape well. Paul Ryan, I beg your pardon, not Paul Singer, is one of the biggest contributors to conservative organizations. How would you describe his influence on professional conservatism in this country, on the Republican Party?
Well, I prefer to call most of this conservative class in Washington, D.C. nothing but a racket. Conservative Inc. has been selling out the interests of most of the American people for decades. The problem that we have here, Tucker, in all of this, I mean, again, it's hard for me to accept the fact that Paul Singer and I would actually argue the Kochs are barely Republicans and certainly not conservatives. And yes. I would argue that any self-respecting conservative shouldn't be taking money from them. But no self-respecting conservative should be seen at a Koch seminar and actually be giving the Kochs money. And the problem is the influence that they have on these. I think we actually, there are a couple things that we've got to have the conversation about. One is, if the majority of the American people start to look at the behavior of Paul Singer and Charles Koch as what is exemplifies the GOP and capitalism, I think it'll be devastating to both the GOP and capitalism in the very near future. But I think we've got to have a conversation about Citizens United, Tucker. I get some of the arguments for it, but it has also empowered the vulture capitalist class to buy a lot of politicians and buy a lot of think tanks who are advocating and implementing policies that are antithetical to the interests of the American worker.
This is an aspect of conservatism that is, in fact, philosophically conservative, that is in line with what I understand to be philosophically conservative beliefs in and around the family, because ultimately, for you to have a functional family, you need a breadwinner. You need, likely, a man, a father, a husband, to go out, bust his ass, return home, put food on the table for the family so that the family can be happy and healthy. That is, from what I understand, a philosophically conservative concern. So, if we start to have an economy where we put out, in essence, the working class man or the working man, the breadwinner, if they are put out and at a severe disadvantage, then conservatism should react to try to better that person's position, to put them at an advantage rather than a disadvantage. Because, again, they are the husband, they are the father, they are the breadwinner, they are the one that is trying to create a happy and healthy family, which is the unit that conservatives should be focused on. That is the basis of, in their view, of society, and should be the most important thing. When you start to worship the market over God and the family, you should be questioning whether you are actually a conservative. You can say that you're a foaming at the mouth philosophical liberal. That's fine. If you're going to say, fuck the family, I got mine. But you can't call yourself a conservative because, from what I understand, you are not. And so I do think there is a role for conservatives, for conservatism, to be aware of class mobility and to be aware of the issues surrounding the breadwinner and economics, employment, the ability for families to be happy and healthy. And a huge portion of that is the ability to pay for that family, for a breadwinner to have the money to make the family happy and healthy. That should be of concern, at least, if not the main concern of a fucking philosophical conservative. Now, how you switch the disadvantage to an advantage, that is a much more difficult question, because I do agree with libertarians, the people who are more market-focused, the economic autists. I do agree that regulations, in many ways, on the economy can be disruptive and counterproductive. That certain hurdles that the government creates, and I can talk about a certain one that I have planned talking about unions in New York and nationally, that a problem that's been created that makes the unions look bad, but is in fact state-created. It's from the government. So when people talk about quotas and all this sort of thing, it's from the government. The competitors for contracts, and we're talking about billions of dollars, they have no choice but to pander to these interests because they want the money. And as a union, they have a fiduciary duty to get that contract, by hook or crook. And if everyone else is pandering to the same bullshit in order to circumvent the prerequisites necessary to be able to get their hands on that contract, that very, very, very lucrative GIB contract, they're going to do whatever it takes. They're going to go past those hurdles to get to that money. Because in return, they're doing their duty as representatives of workers, and they're providing fat contracts that fathers and husbands can make tons of money on fairly by doing good work and returning home and putting food on the table for their family. The problem isn't the union in that instance of contracts, because someone has to do the work. It's the government and creating unnecessary identity-based hurdles that the unions have to work within. It's rules they have to work within in order to get those fat contracts. And we're talking, yet again, just for New York alone, billions and billions of dollars in government money, in contracts. Thousands of contracts. My point is that with the issue of government regulation, you have to be delicate. You have to be a surgeon. You have to be able to look at a problem and say, well, one, we have to acknowledge that this is a problem. With the mercenary right, they don't. They do not acknowledge this as a problem, and that is part of the problem. But for those that agree with this being a problem, the way to fix it must be surgical. It must be thought out. And you have to be careful not to implement even more bureaucracy that will make, that'll be counterproductive, that'll make the issue of employment and being the breadwinner even harder for the average worker. However, I would imagine that everyone who's on my side of this conversation, people like Tucker Carlson, Jack Posobiec, Will Chamberlain, everyone who is on the more nationalist right, I'm certain that we would all acknowledge that no one's looking to come in with a claw hammer and just fuck everything up and to just over-regulate the market. That's not our intention. That's nobody's intention. But the fact is, the way things are, it's creating a level of dissent, of unruly behavior, unruly sentiment, and unrest just generally, just civilly, that we can't continue like this forever. Because eventually we're going to get some fucking Maduro light, some radical socialist that gets elected to office and basically fucks everything if we don't do something. Because discontent is growing. The left is growing more radical. And even though I think that the main source of that is academia, based on the evidence that we have before us, that I can see anyways, it isn't that by itself. There is a problem with our domestic politics. There is a problem based around the economics in this country. And while there certainly is a case for getting rid of the existing bureaucracy, and that is the thing I was raising before of the gender quotas and the diversity quotas, is literally what they're called, diversity quotas. That is unnecessary bureaucracy that we can definitely just flat out get rid of. Just dismantle absolutely all of it so that we can get the best actors possible, the most competent people necessary to gain those contracts and to gain employment based on merit and savvy negotiation skills rather than, and compromise in that way, rather than we have X amount of black people or some other such arbitrary, utterly arbitrary, and by the way, always dishonest and fudged basis. It's just a game, and everyone's playing it, and it's based on a fucking lie. Everyone's fluffing their numbers. Everyone's lying. Everyone involved. And the reason it's being done, by the way, the reason why those kind of systems exist is to make politicians more powerful, because they get to set the standards, and so they get to dispense where the contracts go. It's corruption. It is corruption. And so there is an argument to say that we should have less government involvement in the economy, but the fact is that we have to be aware of the fact that venture capitalists and these uber elite financiers are in some way responsible for the discontent that is growing. And it's on both sides. It is just generally in America. It's growing. And if the right doesn't want some socialist to come into power, which is the point of this segment, then we, being a Republican, we have to take this seriously, and we have to start addressing these issues.
Well, and definitely seem antithetical to the views of Republican voters. I've never seen a bigger misalignment between what the voters want and what they get thanks to a small number of donors. And you're absolutely right. Charles Koch, I don't want to pretend like it's just Paul Singer. It's certainly not just Paul Singer.
That's right.
Charles Koch probably even more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the influence that they have over the white papers and the thinking that's coming out of the conservative ink, the racket, again, people are identifying this as the true conservative movement. I lost all belief and faith and trust that that's what conservatism was about years ago. And in fact, I think we have to really reconsider what the conservative movement actually is, not only what it's advocating, but actually who's funding it and what are its priorities. You know, is its priorities this billionaire class of vulture capitalists, or is it actually on behalf of the American worker and the American people? I have to tell you, Tucker, I think we're kind of living in an illusion right now. You know, we say we have a republic of we the people, for the people. Yeah. I would argue we haven't had that for decades, and the people that are supposed to be defending and advocating for it, they abandoned that a long time ago so they could have their 6- and 7-figure salaries and their marble bathrooms with their gold-plated bathrooms. This is getting to the point of absurdity. We have to have a conversation about this as well.
Yeah, it's dangerous, too. I mean, we're playing with fire. Fake democracy frustrates people to the point where it becomes, you know, scary. And so we should stop this right away.
The last point I'll make is this. The last time we had this about 100 years ago where the uber wealthy and politicians actually created a system that was rigged against the American people. We got progressivism, which has devastated this country. What's going to be the reaction to this? I don't know, but it's not going to be good.
I agree. That's exactly right. Ed Ryan, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
I want to stress the point that is being made. We're not saying, oh, capitalism is immoral now. No one's saying that. As I said in my previous video, I believe capitalism to be a moral system. It is, in my view, a moral system because so much of it is, in fact, voluntary. And where it's not, it's because of the state. We can all understand that, okay? But the fact is that the actors, whether it's politicians, those within the market, or those within government, the bureaucracy of it, that the relationship between them and the status quo of the market as it is, the economy as it is, and the political class as it is, the beltway as it is, that the results of all of this, the culmination of this, is growing discontent. It is civil unrest, and it is not from one side or the other, it is generally. And the problem is, rather than allow this to continue to fester and ignore it and deny that it exists, that the sickness within America exists, rather than just deny it, we should address it and provide actual examples for why you should continue to vote for conservatives on the right and Republicans, as opposed to voting for socialists on the left that claim that they will solve this problem. Because all you need is some left-wing socialist to come along and say that he is focused on the family and so on, and you're going to see resentful, discontent, Republicans, conservatives, working men looking at that socialist and saying, you know what, at least he cares about the family. At least he's talking about the family. At least he's talking about the working man. Rather than all these fucking plutocrats on the right. And the next thing you know, you're going to have fucking Maduro elected to office. And then what happens? That is the danger. That is the fear. And it is in every way legitimate. That is a legitimate fear to have. And I think that if you don't think so, you just are deluded. You're John Stossel. You're deluded. You just think that this can continue on forever. And that nothing is going to come of it. You're David French. You're everyone else. Ben Shapiro. The fact is that on the right, there's a reason why nationalism is growing, why more pragmatic politics as opposed to, you know, philosophically liberal idealism and such, and, well, utopianism, really. Why people are more and more disdainful towards that, and they want the focus of the party to be on the United States, to be focused on domestic politics. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why this is growing, and it is because more and more people of left wing, right wing, they are growing distrustful of the institutions, not just generally as it is with Americans, but just in total. Their distrust is becoming desperate. Their disillusionment is becoming desperate. Their own situations financially are becoming desperate. And they're losing faith in what is called the American dream, but is in fact class mobility. They're losing faith in America. And I don't think the left wing is going to fucking restore it, and that's why I'm no longer left wing. I think the right can, and we must, and so we must say to the right wing people who are just the mercenary right, the internationalist right, take a back seat, stifle yourselves, let us fix this country and these series of problems to the best of our ability. At least give us a shot. It's a question of if you're even trying. It's not even a matter of you failed. It's whether you even care at all and if you even tried. I'll let you guys debate that in the comment section. But something must be done. And for at least today, I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening.